My name is General Mark Milley, and I served as the 20th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for 43 years. I wore the uniform of the United States Army, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the phone call I had to make on October 30th, 2020. A phone call that, if it had gone wrong, could have triggered World War III. Let me be crystal clear about something before I tell you this story. What I'm about to reveal will shock you, anger you, maybe even make you question everything you thought you knew about how close we came to nuclear war. But every word is true, and I'm telling it because the American people deserve to know just how thin the line was between peace and global catastrophe. It was 3:47 a.m. when my secure phone rang in my Pentagon office. I'd been there all night, poring over intelligence reports that painted a picture so terrifying that I hadn't slept properly in weeks. The voice on the other end was Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, and she was more frightened than I'd ever heard any political leader in my entire career. "General Milley," she said, her voice trembling, "we have a problem, a big one. The president is ... unstable. Our intelligence sources are telling us he's considering military action against China. Nuclear action." I sat up straighter in my chair. "Ma'am, what exactly are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that Donald Trump is in a state of mind where he might order a nuclear strike, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen." "Can you guarantee me that won't happen?" The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Here was the Speaker of the House asking me, the top military officer in the United States, to essentially commit to insubordination if the president gave certain orders. But what she didn't know was that I'd already been having the same concerns for weeks. You see, in the days following the election, something had changed in the president. The man I'd served under for nearly 4 years had become increasingly erratic, increasingly dangerous. He was raging about Chinese interference, about stolen elections, about enemies everywhere. And in his rage, he kept mentioning our nuclear capabilities. 3 days before Pelosi's call, Trump had been in a meeting with his inner circle when he suddenly stood up and said, "Maybe it's time to show China what real power looks like. Maybe it's time they understood that we're not afraid to use everything we have." The room went dead silent. When someone asked what he meant, Trump just stared out the window and said, "They'll understand when they see the flash." That's when I knew I had to act. But let me back up and tell you how we got to this point, because this story doesn't begin with that phone call. It begins 6 months earlier, when Chinese military exercises in the South China Sea suddenly became something much more sinister. It was April 15th, 2020, when I first received the intelligence report that would keep me awake for the next 7 months. Our satellites had detected unusual activity at Chinese nuclear facilities. Not just maintenance preparation, the kind of preparation you do when you're getting ready to use something you hope you'll never have to use. The report landed on my desk with a classification level I'd rarely seen. Eyes only. Chairman only. As I read through the technical details, my blood ran cold. The Chinese weren't just maintaining their nuclear arsenal. They were expanding it, rapidly. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the intelligence addendum that came with it. According to our sources inside the Chinese military, Beijing believed that the United States was preparing for a first strike against them. They thought we were planning to attack. This was the classic nightmare scenario that every military strategist fears. A misunderstanding that spirals into mutual annihilation. Both sides preparing for war because they think the other side is preparing for war. I immediately called for a secure conference with the president. When I walked into the Oval Office that day, I found Trump surrounded by advisors who were feeding his paranoia rather than calming it. "General Milley," Trump said, without looking up from a map of the Pacific, "what do you know about Chinese nuclear capabilities?" "Sir, I know that they're significant and that any conflict involving nuclear weapons would be catastrophic for everyone involved." Trump finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes concerned me deeply. There was an anger there, but also something else. Something that looked like excitement. But we could win, couldn't we, General? If it came down to it, we could win. That question haunted me, because it revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what nuclear war actually means. There are no winners in nuclear war. There are only survivors, and even they inherit a world that's barely worth living in. Over the following months, as the election approached, Trump's fixation on China grew stronger. He began talking about them as if they were personally responsible for every problem America faced. And worse, he began talking about military solutions with increasing frequency. The turning point came on October 27th, 3 days before Pelosi's call. I was in my office when my aide rushed in with a transcript of a conversation that had been picked up by our monitoring systems. It was a call between high-ranking Chinese military officials, and what they were discussing made my heart stop. The Americans are preparing for nuclear launch, one voice said. Our sources in Washington confirmed that their president is unstable and may order first strike within days. Should we prepare defensive measures? Asked another voice. Defensive and preemptive. If they launch, we launch. If they prepare to launch, we launch first. I stared at that transcript for a full minute, trying to process what I was reading. The Chinese military was preparing to launch a nuclear attack on the United States based on their belief that we were about to attack them. And the terrifying part was that they weren't entirely wrong about Trump's state of mind. That's when I made the decision that would define the rest of my career and possibly save the world from nuclear holocaust. I picked up my secure phone and dialed a number I'd hoped I'd never have to use. It was the direct line to General Li Zuosheng, my counterpart in the Chinese military, the man who, in a few days, might be responsible for launching nuclear weapons at American cities. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered in accented English. General Milley. This is unexpected. General Li, we need to talk. Immediately. I assume this is about the current ... tensions. Li, listen to me very carefully. I'm calling you as one soldier to another, one professional to another, whatever intelligence you've received about American intentions. Whatever you think you know about our preparations. I need you to understand something. We are not planning a first strike against China. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. General Milley, my government has information that suggests otherwise. Your government has misinformation. I am telling you, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as the senior military officer of the United States, that we have no intention of launching a nuclear attack on China or anyone else. But your president, ... My president is under stress. The election, the pandemic, everything that's happening. He's not thinking clearly about military matters. But I want you to understand something very important. Any order for nuclear weapons launch goes through me. And I will not allow a nuclear war to start based on misunderstandings and paranoia. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Li finally spoke, his voice was different, more human, less official. General Milley, are you telling me that you would disobey a direct order from your president? It was the question I'd been dreading, but also the question I knew I had to answer honestly. Li, I'm telling you that I will not allow a nuclear war to start unless America is under immediate and verified attack. I'm telling you that if you receive reports of American nuclear launch preparations in the coming days or weeks, you should call me directly before taking any action. This is highly irregular, General. These are highly irregular times. Li, we're talking about the potential end of civilization as we know it. Irregular doesn't begin to cover what's at stake here. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel him weighing his options. What you're proposing, it could be considered treason by your government. What I'm proposing could prevent the deaths of hundreds of millions of people. If that's treason, then I'll face those consequences. And you're certain that your president will not order a first strike? Here's where I had to make the biggest gamble of my life. Because the truth was, I wasn't certain at all. Trump's behavior had become so erratic, so unpredictable, that I genuinely feared he might order a nuclear attack in a moment of rage or paranoia. Lee, I'm giving you my word as a soldier and as a man that if there is any movement toward nuclear action on our side, I will call you first. And I'm asking for the same courtesy. You want me to call you before we launch nuclear weapons at your country? I want you to call me so that we never have to launch nuclear weapons at all. Another long pause. Then, General Milley, I will consider your proposal, but I must ask what happens if your president discovers what you've done. That question would prove to be prophetic. 2 days later, my worst fears came true. Trump had gotten word of unusual Chinese military activity and was demanding immediate briefings on our nuclear readiness. When I walked into that briefing room on October 29th, I could see in his eyes that he was ready to make a decision that could end the world. General, Trump said, his voice sharp with anger, I want to know exactly how quickly we can launch if I give the order. Sir, may I ask what's prompted this question? The Chinese are moving pieces around the board, General. They think they can intimidate us. I want them to know that we're not afraid to use everything in our arsenal. The other people in the room, advisors, cabinet members, staff, were nodding along as if this was a reasonable conversation to be having. But I could see the fear in some of their eyes. They knew, just as I did, that we were standing on the edge of an abyss. Mr. President, any nuclear action would require careful consideration of. I don't want consideration, General. I want readiness. How long? I looked around the room, at all these people who were depending on me to be the voice of reason in an increasingly unreasonable situation. Sir, nuclear weapons are not tactical tools. They're strategic weapons of last resort. The moment we use them, we fundamentally change the nature of human civilization. Trump slammed his hand on the table. Don't lecture me about civilization, General. I'm asking you a simple question. If I give the order, how long until launch? That's when I realized that this conversation was no longer theoretical. Trump wasn't asking about procedures. He was asking about timing. He was seriously considering ordering a nuclear strike. Mr. President, I strongly advise against any nuclear action without clear evidence of imminent threat to the United States. That's not what I asked you, General. The room was dead silent. Everyone was looking at me, waiting to see what I would say. And in that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Sir, any nuclear launch order would require verification through proper channels to ensure it's legitimate and lawful. It was the most diplomatically worded act of insubordination in military history. I was essentially telling the President of the United States that I would not immediately comply with a nuclear launch order without first verifying that it was legal and appropriate. Trump stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing what I'd just said. General Milley, are you telling me that you would question a direct order from your commander-in-chief, sir? I'm telling you that nuclear weapons protocols exist for a reason, and those protocols include verification procedures. The tension in that room was suffocating. Everyone knew they were witnessing something unprecedented in American history. The top military officer, essentially refusing to guarantee immediate compliance with a presidential order. Trump stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. As he left the room, I knew that my relationship with the president was fundamentally changed. But more importantly, I knew that I had bought time to make sure that any nuclear decision would be made with full consideration of the consequences. That night, I made the most difficult phone call of my military career. I called General Lee, it's Milley. We need to talk again. General, I was hoping you would call. Things are escalating here. Here too, Lee. I need you to understand something. The next 48 hours are critical. My president is under enormous pressure. and he's considering military options that could trigger the exact scenario we discussed. Are you saying he might order a nuclear strike? I'm saying that if he does, you'll hear from me before you hear from our missiles. But Lee, I need the same guarantee from you. General Milley, what I'm asking is that we prevent World War III. What I'm asking is that we put the survival of human civilization above military protocol. And if our governments discover what we've done, then we'll face the consequences. But at least there will be governments left to face consequences too. Lee was quiet for a long moment. General, I give you my word. If Beijing orders nuclear action, you will be contacted first, and I give you mine. We hung up, and I sat in my office, staring at the phone, wondering if I'd just committed treason or prevented the apocalypse. The next morning, October 30th, everything came to a head. Trump had spent the night tweeting about China, about strength, about showing enemies what American power looked like. The intelligence community was in full panic mode, and that's when Pelosi called. After her call, I knew I had to take one more step. I called my senior staff together and gave them instructions that I pray to God no American general will ever have to give again. If the president orders nuclear launch, I told them, you will immediately contact me. Regardless of the time, regardless of what I'm doing, no nuclear weapons will be launched without my direct involvement and verification. It was mutiny. It was insubordination. It was potentially treason. It was also the right thing to do. Fortunately, the crisis passed. Trump's attention turned to other matters. The Chinese stepped back from their heightened alert status, and the world continued to exist. But I want you to understand how close we came. We were less than 48 hours away from a nuclear exchange. That could have killed hundreds of millions of people and ended civilization as we know it. I've been criticized for what I did. Some people say I overstepped my authority, that I violated my oath, that I should have trusted the system to work. But I was there. I saw the look in the president's eyes. I heard the desperation in the speaker's voice. I read the intelligence reports about Chinese preparations. The system wasn't working. The system was about to fail. Catastrophic ally. So I made a choice. I chose the survival of humanity over strict adherence to protocol. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep. Some truths are too important to hide. The American people deserve to know how close we came to the end of everything. And they deserve to know that sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and catastrophe is one person willing to say no when everyone else is saying yes. Now, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. If you were in my position, facing the choice between following orders and preventing nuclear war, what would you have done? And here's my second question. Knowing what you know now about how close we came to World War III, do you think the public has a right to know about these kinds of crises while they're happening? Or should these decisions be made in secret by a small group of people? Think about those questions, because the answers might determine how we handle the next crisis, and, believe me, there will be a next crisis. The aftermath of those October days changed everything for me personally. I couldn't sleep properly for months afterward. Every time my phone rang at night, my first thought was that another crisis was brewing, that another decision between duty and humanity was waiting for me. The investigation into my actions began 3 months later. Congressional hearings, interviews with federal investigators, questions about my loyalty and my oath. Some called me a hero, others called me a traitor. The truth, as always, was somewhere in between. During one particularly intense hearing, Senator Graham looked me straight in the eye and asked, "General, do you believe you have the authority to countermand a direct order from the President of the United States?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. "Senator, I believe I have the responsibility to ensure that any order I follow is lawful, constitutional, and in the best interests of the American people. If that makes me a traitor, Then, I suppose I'm a traitor who prevented World War III. The room erupted. Some applauded, others shouted. But I meant every word. You see, what people don't understand is that the nuclear football, that briefcase that follows the president, everywhere isn't just a symbol of power. It's a symbol of responsibility. The responsibility to potentially end human civilization with the press of a button. That responsibility doesn't rest with one person, no matter how high their office. It rests with all of us who have sworn to protect and defend the Constitution, even when that means protecting it from those who would abuse its power. In the months that followed, I learned more about just how close we'd come to disaster. Intelligence reports that were declassified years later revealed that the Chinese had, in fact, been minutes away from launching what they called a preemptive defensive strike against American military installations in the Pacific. Their submarines were in position. Their missile batteries were armed. Their pilots were in their cockpits. The only thing that stopped them was the phone call I made to General Lee. Lee himself confirmed this in a memoir he published after retiring from the Chinese military. He wrote, "General Milley's call was the only reason Beijing decided to wait. His assurance that America was not preparing to attack gave our leadership the pause they needed to reconsider. So when people ask me if I would do it again, if I would make that same choice, I think about those Chinese submarines. I think about those missile batteries. I think about the cities that would have been vaporized if cooler heads hadn't prevailed. And my answer is always the same. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes, the responsibility we bear as military leaders isn't just to follow orders. It's to ensure that the orders we follow don't destroy the very country we've sworn to protect. But here's what really keeps me awake at night. How many times has this happened before? How many times have we come to the brink of nuclear war because of misunderstandings, because of paranoia, because of leaders who mistake destruction for strength? And how many times have we been saved not by systems or protocols, but by individual people who chose to do the right thing instead of the easy thing? I've spent my entire adult life in service to this country, and I can tell you that our survival as a species doesn't depend on our weapons or our technology. It depends on our wisdom, our restraint, and our willingness to choose communication over destruction. The phone call I made to General Lee wasn't just about preventing a war. It was about proving that, even in our darkest moments, even when fear and anger threaten to overwhelm us, human beings can still choose to talk instead of fight. That's the real lesson of those 48 hours in October 2020. Not that our systems failed, but that individual conscience can triumph over institutional madness. Not that our leaders are infallible, but that sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is say no to power. And not that nuclear weapons make us safe, but that they make us, every single person on this planet, hostages to the judgment of a very small number of people. I retired from the military in 2023, but I've never stopped thinking about those days. I've never stopped wondering what would have happened if I'd made different choices. If I'd followed protocol instead of my conscience. Would we be having this conversation? Would your children have a future? Would there still be cities standing? Families intact? Dreams to pursue? I don't know. And that uncertainty is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. But I do know this. The next time someone tells you that nuclear weapons are necessary for peace, remember how close we came to using them over a misunderstanding. The next time someone tells you that military leaders should always follow orders without question, remember that sometimes the most important order is the one you refuse to follow. And the next time someone tells you that one person can't make a difference in the course of history, remember that sometimes one phone call can save the world. My name is General Mark Milley, and this is the story of the secret phone call that almost started World War III. It's a story I never wanted to tell, but one that I believe you needed to hear, because the next crisis is coming, and when it does, I hope there will be someone else willing to pick up the phone and choose humanity over protocol. Think about those questions, because the answers might determine how we handle the next crisis. And believe me, there will be a next crisis.